May the force be with you is a phrase used to wish a person well to overcome a challenge. The invitation in this podcast, May the life force be with you, is to explore what it means to truly feel alive, to appreciate the physical, emotional and spiritual connection to our energy, and finally to understand how this impacts who you are and all that you do. May this conversation inspire you to thrive. This episode of May the Life Force Be With You is brought to you by Moment Company and the Moment Pebble. The Moment Pebble is a beautiful, natural stone, light-guided breathing device and is a unique gift for someone who needs that gentle reminder to stop and take a break, to take moments throughout their busy day and to practice mindfulness. Just head over to momentcompany.co, that's momentcompany.co, and enter the code LIFEFORCE at checkout to receive an exclusive 10% podcast discount.
Welcome to May the Life Force Be With You, and our intention for everybody listening ever is that this conversation inspires you to become more alive and understand how precious and important your life force energy is.
Oh, that was beautiful today. Thank you, Karila. And it's my job today to introduce our fabulous guest, who is Jem Ayers, and she is a certified sex geek. I keep wanting to say sex god, but maybe we'll go there too. She's a sexology bodyworker, Tantra practitioner and teacher, and a workshop facilitator, public speaker, and orgasmic embodiment coach. We're going to have a lot to talk about. She has over 10 years experience in the field of self-development through the body, which at one point included a burlesque company. For my sister, we definitely have to talk about that. And Jem also runs the Empowered Women's Book Club and was the co-founder of Brighton Talks Sex. Healing herself from stage 4 cancer with everything and anything that worked means Jem is alive to tell her story today through the healing power of orgasm. And I have to also say, reading through Jem's website, of which we will share all the details as part of this show, I don't think we've ever had anybody on the show that has so much life force energy oozing out of everything that they do, but also mentions life force energy in everything that we do and everything that you do. So you're supposed to be on this show today, Jem. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It feels absolutely correct. Thank you.
I mean,
I always sit here listening to the introduction of me, and it kind of goes on and on. I'm like, oh, wow, yeah, I've done quite a lot, haven't I? I forgot about that. So, yeah, I'm really happy to be here. And my intention for this podcast, or any podcast actually, but this podcast in particular, is, just to remind people that life force is absolutely vital for all aspects of our life and how we can make improvements everywhere through tapping into our innate body wisdom. So that's what I want to bring.
I agree more. So when can I just ask, maybe kicking it off, why life force energy? So, look, people talk about energy, people talk about being in their body. When you look at other, coaches, practitioners, yoga, Tantra, there's lots of different people that we've had on this podcast. And I think a lot of people listening can understand what energy means. But what does that life force energy that you talk about throughout your work really mean to you?
Yeah, thank you. I suppose the mainstream and the very simple bite-sized thing of what I do is sex coaching. And obviously it's a lot bigger than that. But I know in my 20s, when I was experiencing sexual shutdown, that really was, I wasn't living. I was just surviving.
Can you just clarify? Because I get what sexual shutdown means, but if somebody's listening and they're like, what? Like, what do you mean by sexual shutdown?
No, thank you. Great question. Do you know what? My body just said no. At the time, I was in a really loving, beautiful relationship, and my body just said no. I had no desire, I had no libido. I was kind of trying to go through the motions to keep my relationship alive, really. But my body was like an absolute no to the experience. And I noticed that not only did it have a knock-on effect, not only on my sex and my self-worth and my relationship, but on all aspects of my life, because I wasn't able to be in my body, in my sexual energy. I didn't feel safe. And I cut down so much of myself that my comfort zone had become very, very small.
And so do you mind me asking, presumably the relationship started with you being sexually active with each other. And, lesbian bed death is a thing, yeah? Like, it's a known thing in the lesbian. So that sexual shutdown definitely is something that is more common to women, I think. Was it just something that happened slowly through the relationship, or did it happen overnight? Or
I think it happens slowly over the relationship. And I think at the start of a relationship where there's loads of kind of new partner chemicals firing off in our system, like I now get the science of it because I know this, it was kind of easy to almost fake my way through the experience. But because I'd had years and years and years of tolerating sex and touch and experiences that actually weren't for me and weren't for my body just said, you're not going to do this anymore. And it was nothing to do with that exact partner at the time. It was everything to do with my body just not trusting me, actually, to keep it safe in experiences, to put down boundaries, to change my mind, and to go for my own pleasure, because I had no experience of that. And most of us in female bodies, because we don't live in a very sex positive environment, which is tailored to female pleasure, we don't know what we like, and we don't know that we have permission to go for it or learn about it or change our mind.
And so you were basically having sex to please your partner, essentially, as opposed to having sex to please yourself.
Yeah, but I didn't know that. That's the thing. I think this is the thing. Those of us as women don't recognise that there are other options around pleasure and sex than the ones that we are presented in porn, films, sex education. We've kind of been tailored towards the more male approach or the performance approach to pleasure, which also doesn't satisfy men, actually. This isn't a man versus woman thing. It's just an approach of sex which is limited. It's kind of, there's one experience that's kind of within the box of what's okay for sex. And that wasn't my pleasure,
And so you found that then had an effect on your everything.
It had an effect on everything: my mental health, my physical health, my spiritual health, my connection to my body. And when I eventually found bodywork and Tantra and sexuality communities, it wasn't actually my sex life that changed overnight, because I believed I was so far from experiencing pleasure and orgasm that it would never happen. What actually changed overnight was my work and my business and my self-worth and the people I attracted and the money I started making. So working with my life force energy, my sexual charge, the part of me that's really alive and present in this world, was rippling out into all aspects of my life. While I was sat in Tantra circles hearing other people wanting to experience multiple orgasmic bliss states, I was chuckling away to myself thinking, not this lifetime, I won't. But I kept turning up and it kept feeling good for me. And I followed that. I followed that joy. And I knew in those spaces that is where I was living the most. So this is how I feel most alive right now, is when I work on my sexual energy. Even if I don't think it's working, or even if I don't think I'm getting anything sexual out of it, something is working for me here.
I mean, that's profound to me that, like, as you're speaking, I'm like, on a big picture level in society, we're not very good at following our pleasure.
No, we're conditioned to suffer actually quite a lot. Yeah. Stay in discomfort, stay in uncomfortable jobs, uncomfortable relationships, uncomfortable situations, sit in uncomfortable chairs at uncomfortable laptops doing work that doesn't necessarily give us joy. And then we save joy for the one holiday a year we get, or for Sunday afternoons after we've recovered from a late Friday night. So joy's the thing at the end of the to-do list.
Mm-hmm. Which is why we have that orgasm relationship in a way of like destination, like in a way, like as you're speaking, I'm like, that's kind of how I have first approached sex, of like, you just go through it and then you hope you get an orgasm like a 2-week holiday in the year.
Yeah, for sure. We don't have time to try anything else. Let's do what works. Let's do what worked last week. Quick, let's fit it in whilst we've got a moment. And if we don't orgasm, it's possibly a little bit of a fail. Shame on us. Let's try again next week.
Next year, if you have lesbian bedtime.
and there's no time for play or no time for exploration and for the potential of our bodies being a bit unreliable or getting it wrong in society's eyes. So yeah, so my work is all about prioritizing pleasure.
And do you think that is vital to having a successful relationship? Sometimes you hear people that say, no, actually, the sex was the bad part of the relationship, but we have great companionship. We build a life together. There's so many other things that give us joy. Do you think that that's genuine? Do you think that people can have a connection or relationship that doesn't have sex in it? I'm not asking for a friend, by the way.
I think, yeah, absolutely. As long as both people are really happy with that.
It's about being on the same page. That's the most important thing then, rather than it has to be one way or the other. It's about the connection between the two individuals and them being on the same page. It's the most important thing.
Well, it starts with the self. Let's stop focusing on a couple, because if we think about sexual energy as always in a relationship, again, we're limiting ourselves. We have this idea that sex means relationship, and it doesn't necessarily. Connection with yourself first. What is my sexual energy in my body? It's not about anyone else, and it's not about what's outside of me, and it's not about my partner or pornography. I've been single a long time, and I'm super, super sexual in my own body. And that doesn't even necessarily mean self-touch and self-pleasure and masturbation rituals. It just means that I feel sexuality in me and I let it move through me and affect everything that I do. It's not about a charge that I build up and then has to be used or grabbed at, or someone else has to suddenly get involved. It's about how I charge myself in my system and how I use that in my life. Either that's through my work, through my prayer, through my yoga, through my gymming. It's about sexual energy isn't actually about sex and about genitals. And it's beautiful if you could come together with another person or people and share that. Yeah, that's a nourishing thing to do as well. But a lot of my work is to get people to separate the idea that, it doesn't count for me because I'm single. It absolutely counts for you. You need to absolutely work on it single first. And a lot of my work with couples is getting them to work on it as individuals first. Because otherwise, when we come together and we don't have our innate life force charged, then where are we trying to get it? We're trying to get it from the other person instead of being fueled in ourselves, and we're both overflowing to give.
And so I just want to ask, when you try and get it from another person, is that attachment? Is that go into those like attachment, unhealthy patterns because you're trying to get the life force energy that you then associate?
Well, like attachment, I don't think it's a conscious thing. So I think they're two separate things. It definitely could be a contributing factor. But I think it's just, if things get filled in, if there's a void of something, we're going to get that from everywhere. We're going to try and get it for everyone around us. We're going to try and get energy, joy from everything that we do, but not necessarily consciously. And that's not a bad thing. We all do it. We all need support sometimes, and we all need to lean on people and lean on things to fill us. But ultimately, often what happens is when we are really empty, we do it in unhealthy ways. So we might do it through, I'm an internet shopper. I know that when times of challenges, I don't smoke, I don't drink, I go internet shopping. And suddenly all of these parcels turn up that I can't even remember ordering, Other people do it through maybe over-exercising or late-night partying. And all of these things aren't a bad thing. It's just if that's our only route to charging ourselves and our life force, then it's not necessarily helpful.
So what would you say is the best route to charging yourself and your life force?
Oh, I don't know about the best for anyone else, but I can definitely speak about my experience. For me, I need to be, it's self-care actually is the absolute number one thing. So making sure that I'm really looking after my body, my diet is really healthy and clean. I eat an alkaline vegan diet. So I know that I try to, as little toxicity goes into my system as much as possible. This morning I've had loads of green juice, I've had loads of water, I've tried to sleep really well. And then so what's the foundation for me? Anything, like if I haven't got that, there's no point me doing anything else to try and charge myself up. So I set my foundation foods first: good sleep, good food, good self-care, and try and live as stress-free lifestyle as possible, And then on top of that, to actually charge myself would be things like dance, yoga, prayer, chant, sunshine. and then sex is involved in that as well, potentially, whether that's self-pleasure or breath work or energetic sex with myself or with partners.
You're covering quite a lot of things as sex. So again, I feel like I understand it because I've been in Tantra spaces and stuff, but somebody that's listening and doesn't, and is going, what do you mean? Like sex has breath, or like, can you just define that a bit so that
yeah, absolutely. Anything that creates sexual charge in your system. Okay. Anything, I know if I sit on a sunny beach and I really feel the sun on my skin and I just take a few moments to notice it, I can feel a charge in my system. I can feel sensation in my body. That is pleasure, ultimately.
So it's the sensuality of an experience.
Pleasure sensation in your body. We have this idea that there's pleasure that's not sexual, and then there's pleasure that is. It's all the same stuff. Pleasure is pleasure. It's just a spectrum. So we're also often ignoring the lower end pleasures when we're trying to achieve the higher intensity climaxes or peak experiences. But those lower end pleasures really need paying attention to. So if we're not self-caring, if we're not looking after ourselves, if we're not looking after our body, how can we get in from a really stressful day or week at work and then suddenly expect to be like our best lovers in the evening, whether that's for ourselves or our partner? Because we drag in the day into the bedroom with us. So for me, there's a good thing about self-care and like finding my foundation first.
I also feel that like for most females, those small things are what lead to the best or the height. It's like the small, for a woman especially, I don't know so much about sex with men, I haven't had it for a while, but like it's the small, it's lots and lots of small things that actually build up the full charge for the heightened sexual experiences.
I agree. And I don't think the genders are that different either. I think there is absolutely the myth of, men are more interested in the peak or the orgasm or the cock-focused approach. And maybe that's the messages out there in the world that we're told. But when I work, because I work individually with men and I work individually with women and couples and I lead groups, and what I hear time and time again is when men are given the opportunity, like those of us in female bodies, when men are given the opportunity to just feel that slow, subtle build, they're absolutely blown away by it. It's just none of us know that we're allowed it, or none of us know it's an option, or none of us know how it feels because we haven't given it to ourselves before, because we haven't had it role modelled out in the world. We've all been told what sex should look like, right? But also, even if we think, I don't want us to think about those small pleasures as foreplay for a better thing. Like we're still kind of talking about, but that all those lovely things make the orgasm better. I want us to stay with those small pleasures, because for me, I'd rather be in that place for days and days and weeks and let it build and let myself live with that charge than build into a peak which kind of disperses it, and then I have to start building the charge again. So even when I do have lovers, I often talk to them about, don't try to make me orgasm. Don't try to grab my clitoris. Let's just go slow and slow. And actually, I want to bask in the pleasure.
Yeah, I fully agree, actually, in the sense of it's like when you're fully present with the smaller pleasure, there's an amazing experience that is as good as a full-blown orgasm. Do you know what I mean? So I fully resonate. And I love what you say about the expending of energy. And one of the things that May the Life Force is teaching me is how much our life force energy sustains our reality. And if we want to get a better reality, we have to get a higher level of life force energy at a habitual level, not at a peak level. Do you see what I mean? It's like we have to raise the habitual level of our life force energy to raise the vibration of our reality. And so this suggestion of small pleasures feels really like it helps with that.
Yeah, and I'm a lot better at doing that for myself when I'm single than I am when I'm in a relationship. So when I'm single, my life looks really sorted. Like I've got everything down, I've got everything in place, I'm buzzing, I'm vibing, I've got a great community, a great social life. And then when I get into a relationship, I fall into the habit, as most of us do, that kind of like that sex and peak and orgasm is still the thing to do, you know. And that's okay, because we kind of get a little bit addicted. The brain chemistry that fires off at the point of orgasm is super addictive, you know. And so we kind of get a little bit needing or wanting that orgasm. And also we all get a bit lazy as well. Maybe that's the quick fix. You know, the quick fix is like peak orgasm instead of like the slow, nourishing kind of grazing of pleasure over the day.
Ooh, Grazing of Pleasure. I think we found the name of the podcast. I love that. I love that.
I don't think I've ever used that term before.
You will now.
We told you this is an activation.
I'd actually like to
maybe it's my book title.
I'd like to take a little meander in the conversation slightly to two things. The first thing is burlesque. As I mentioned in the introduction, my sister loves burlesque. Dita Von Teese is her hero, and she loves a burlesque show, and it does look like a real sort of giving of pleasure. I've been to a few kind of cabarets, and they're so much fun, and everybody walks out with a smile on their face. But what's it like to perform? So you said that you actually created a burlesque school. Can you tell us a little bit about what led you to do that, and who comes along, who joins in? I'm sure there's some very funny to be had.
Thank you. My burlesque school was called the Burlesque Gems, and this was 13 years ago. And funnily enough, it started at the same time as I started my Tantra journey. They were side by side. And so as my Tantra journey was building, my company, my business was absolutely exploding. And I really, when I looked into it, it wasn't anywhere that was leading just dance classes. It was all very specialist solo practice for kind of, young skinny women. And I was like, okay, I want to allow all women the gift of feeling into their sexual body and just being able to express the side of themselves that we have to keep in a box most of the week, or we can only get out for our partners. Yeah, everyone's got that cheeky bit of lingerie somewhere at the back of the wardrobe that comes out begrudgingly on Valentine's Day, maybe. So it's like, okay, instead of being sexy for a partner, let's be sexy for ourselves, shall we? So this is where my work began, and it absolutely rocketed. And I know burlesque is super popular now, but at the time there was nothing like it. And so at its peak, I had 5 tutors that I trained working for me, and I had other performers. We had Elton John's birthday burlesque performer come and work with us as well for a little while. And we did kind of like little tours with some of us, and we did showcases, and I was teaching nipple tassel workshops and all sorts. It was a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful 5 years. And I think it was just, and I saw the same in the women that had happened to me. Women turned up flat and nervous and anxious in their jogging bottoms and T-shirts. Mm-hmm. And by week 2, they dusted off a corset. They'd potentially left their, left their jobs or left their husband. And this kind of stuff happened really quickly, and they absolutely boomed. And I really think it's because they were given a space of safety and acceptance for a part of them that isn't safe and accepted out there in the real world.
Feels so empowering.
And so what it does is it brings wholeness to our experience. Instead of 95% of us being acceptable, but yet this 5% needs to be kept under lock and key and is a bit shamed. It's like, bring it in, bring our sexuality in, bring our bodies in, and then suddenly we're whole, And that, I think, the gods love that. You know, the world, the universe loves that when we're in our wholeness and our fullness.
Yeah. I I feel like beauty is very much about how much energy you hold. That's what I'm learning, is like the feeling of being beautiful is actually the feeling of being full of your own energy,
Yeah.
and the clothes and something like burlesque can really inspire you to find that fullness. But that's that, when you feel beautiful, if you actually check in with your energy, you're like, I am rocket, like I am full, like I have energy today. And when you have those like jogging pants, those days where you're like not feeling beautiful, your energy is really worth checking in with your energy level and noticing how different it is depending on how beautiful you're feeling.
And at our peak, we had about 150 women learning from us burlesque. And what I recognised was these women were really, really in their power, because I wasn't, it wasn't, my burlesque wasn't about let's be pretty for the audience, or pose like this and stand like this for the male gaze. It was very much like, what is in you right now that feels sexy and needs expressing? So I taught a dance routine, and it had some structure to it, obviously, but then it was like, okay, what wants to come out from you? What makes you feel sexy? Because I'm far more interested in people in their authentic expression of sexuality than I am of someone trying to fill a role that they think I will like. Like, we know it, we smell it, we all know it. We can tell when someone's being sexy for themselves, and it might not look like sexy for society, but it pulls us in, And this is something I teach in my sex coaching as well, is how we drop the prettiness, how we drop the good girl. Because I know for me, one of my massive turning points in my own sexuality was noticing that in sex, I was trying to be pretty. And it's not even a word I use. And I've always been a proud feminist, but I was like, wow, that conditioning is out there, that as a woman in sex, I always have to be pretty. And when I let go of that and I felt safe enough in myself to do that, what I actually noticed was my fullest sexual expression wasn't pretty. I usually use the word grotesque at this point. Maybe it's a bit dribbly and a bit grunty and a bit sweaty, and I'm in really strange positions making incredibly strange noises. And so far, no one's complained. But that's what makes my body feel really good, is when I'm in my authenticity, instead of trying to make myself look good and perform for someone else and doing what I've seen in pornography. That just doesn't work for me. And what I'm hearing is it doesn't work for most, but we don't know it because we don't try the alternative, because we don't know what the alternative is.
And sex in modern times has become very visual because of films and porn and everything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you think about our grandparents, they just didn't have that level of role modeling in sex. So they could kind of figure it out between them a bit. And I'm not saying that, that was definitely a shiny golden era of sex or anything. But I think there's a lot of imprinting that happens, especially through pornography, easy pornography, super easy access. I've worked with young men who have had porn addictions from the age of 10 because it's so accessible, and it doesn't, and it's not just women that it affects them, and male beliefs around their performance and their body and what women want as well. So it's not, they should know better. It's none of us are getting the education that we need. None of us are getting a pleasure education that we need.
No, I mean, sex ed in school was like, put a condom on a banana, wasn't it? It was like, don't get pregnant.
Don't get pregnant. Don't do STIs. Great. What do I do then? What can I do? What are the other options?
There was nothing about like how to do it. It was just like, you will know how to put a condom on a random shaped fruit.
Yeah. And so I run a bunch of different events, and some of the events I run are called touch parties. And do you know what? It's the kind of stuff I want to take into schools, obviously at a certain level. But it's like, how do we touch each other's hands and enjoy it? How do we feel someone else's hands for our own experience? How do we feel into if that stops being okay for me? And how do I take my hands back to my own body so that we all have a pause and we check in with consent? And I kind of think it's like pleasure education for adults,
Yeah.
you know, like how do we step into interaction with each other in a really aware way, you know, bringing real mindfulness to touch. Instead of just, oh, we've started touching now, which means we kiss, which means we fumble, which means it leads to foreplay, which means it leads to rutting, which means it kind of ends in peak orgasm. And we can't really get off that train. And the experience now has to end in someone orgasming. You know?
And I think a lot of women, to bring it back round to the beginning thing that you mentioned about the disconnecting from your body, I feel like a lot of people just learn to submit to that train.
Absolutely. And men too. Like, I think all genders do this. All genders do this. It's very easy for us to say women do it, but men are there really, you know, their messaging is, oh God, she needs to come first. And if she doesn't come first, then I'm a bad lover. So now I have to hold back from this serious amount of charge that's happening in my body. And, you know, women are probably never going to come in that situation anyway, because we're all suddenly in our anxiety and in our heads and in our expectations. So sex isn't working for anyone, you know.
And then there's this like disembodied sex that is happening that eventually, I think that's what people shut down to.
Yeah.
And they just don't want to have sex anymore.
It's sex without pleasure. Our body just goes, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Sex without pleasure. Boof. We don't want that anymore. And our body has a response. But if we come back to life force, I haven't even finished answering the very first question, I realise. So, you know, so I noticed through my Tantra and my burlesque that life force energy in my body, which for me is absolutely about everything, including sexuality, was what was charging me, was what was fueling me. It was fueling me to create dances. It was fueling me to build my business, to make money, to have beautiful, positive experiences with friends and partners. And what I noticed was then I actually overworked myself. And that's when I got cancer. That's what I got ill. And when I was told that...
Overworked your pleasure, or you overworked...
I think just my pleasure was absolutely fueling me, but the society pressure of having to achieve and having to get to the goal is what was, you know, I was pushing my body too hard because I wasn't giving myself the level of self-care that I've spoken about. I wasn't giving myself the good sleep, the good diet, the not drinking, the non-binge drinking, you know, all of those things. So I had a rocky foundation. And my work was going really beautifully. And the goal-orientated approach that's out there in the world of when something goes well, do more of it and do it quicker and do it harder and do it faster. You know, these aren't just messages in sex, right?
How you have sex is how you do everything well.
That's exactly it. What shows up in your sex life shows up everywhere in your life. And so by the time I got cancer, I was actually quite exhausted. And that was when I went, okay, now I need to really look after my body. So that's when I put the foundations in place to look after myself at a really basic level. What am I taking into my system through food, through water, through words and energy? And what am I watching on screens? But also when I was told that all they could offer me was palliative care and that I should just go home and wait for a letter from my oncologist, I knew that I had something to offer because I'd been working on my full body orgasmic experience, basically. And I knew for me that life force was the opposite of cancer.
Just say that again, let that land for people.
Life force for me was the opposite of cancer. So cancer was death, disease, suffering, pain, and at best, it was survival. And I really noticed how the messages around cancer were, you'll beat this, you'll kick its ass, you've got this. And it was very much a fighter way. And I didn't want to be a fighter because I knew that was of the fight and flight nervous system. I wanted to be in kind of like my relaxed arousal and my softness as much as possible. So I didn't completely slump and give up, but I didn't want to fight. And so I knew that I'd experienced life force in my body, and I knew that cancer was just cells that had mutated in my body. And I thought, if I fill all of these cells with as much joy as possible, then that's going to absolutely help heal me. And I knew that full body orgasmic experience was, for me, the biggest way to do it. Like the sensation of joy in my nose, in my fingertips, spread into my toes. I was like, that's what I want. And I'd seen a video years before by a Japanese doctor, Dr. Emoto, who does experiments on water. And lots of people have done this on rice and on plants as well. Anything that contains water, basically. And he's taken water from different places and he's put it in positive environments with singing and chanting and children laughing. And then he's taken other water, he's put it in negative environments like, you know, punk music or swearing or words like Adolf Hitler and stuff like that. And then he looks under the microscope and the water that's been taken to the joy place, the cellular molecules have kind of like morphed into these beautiful snowflakes, and the ones that have been taken into the, I'm going to say, violent or less beautiful place have morphed into blobs, and they're not beautiful at all. And it's the same water, but in two different environments. Like the vibration has affected it. And if you look at our body as, what is it, 85% water or something? It's a big amount. Like our cells are 99.9% water. And I was like, okay, what water in my system? If I'm mostly water, what do I want to be made out of? Do I want to be made out of these beauty, or do I want to be made out of these kind of really grotesque globulars? So I did everything I could to make the cells in my body be full of this beauty. So I did yoga, I did chanting, I did hula hooping, I wore high heels to clean the bath, I did burlesque dancing, and I did full body orgasmic experiences, whether that was with myself or with partners. And I did it as a practice, as a conscious discipline. Like every week I'm going to donate, I'm going to put an orgasm towards my healing and send it to my cancer cells. And 6 months later, I was cancer-free, I should probably add. I did also do a lot of other things. I also changed my diet. That's when I became vegan alkaline. I did also, leave more of a stress-free lifestyle. I did also take the medication they gave me, which was palliative care only, which they thought would stabilize me at best. But no, something worked. And the doctors who originally said, oh, don't worry about doing anything, nothing will change anything, 6 months later said, whatever you're doing, Jem, because they knew I was up to something, because I was the one who was asking the difficult questions. They said, whatever you're doing, Jem, just keep doing it.
Did they ask you what you did?
Did they ask me? Yeah. Some of them did ask, but they're far more interested in what supplements did you take than me talking about the power of meditation and orgasm.
And so you've said full body orgasm. Again, for people listening that are like, what is that?
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about two kinds of orgasms, and there's probably millions of different ones, right? But let's keep it simple. So a peak orgasm is kind of what we know of as the best. They're the best, or the easiest, or the ones that are the most shown in films, or the ones that are easily accessible. So it's that kind of where we hard, fast, friction-based touch to a point of orgasm, climax, or ejaculation. And it's very much charge that's built up in the genitals, and we keep it at the genitals, and we're still touching and still rutting at the genitals till we get to our climax, and then we have a drop-off. Peak orgasm. And for most women, it's probably accessed through the clitoris, and for most men, it's orgasm through their head or their cock, basically. And for me, what my practice is, I really enjoy experiencing, is when I raise the charge in my body, and it's not necessarily through touch, or it's not necessarily through sex, and I can move that through the rest of my system, through breath and sound and movement. And this is what I teach in my full body orgasm retreats, so that I can feel the pleasure rippling through all of my system. And this is where I was on TV on Channel 4, and there was hours and hours and days of filming for the whole 4 minutes or whatever that I was on. And the one bit they choose to keep in was me talking about ankle-gasms. So this is kind of where this bit comes in, which is, we think of like sex as involving our genitals, but actually how can I get, we've got skin, we've got pleasure sensors everywhere. So how about we feel the orgasmic experience through our whole body? And that for me is life force. It's the zing that we get that tells us we're alive, that fuels us, that charges us, that lifts us. So on those days when, we feel tired, or we've got a headache, or we're not feeling up for sex, actually, how can sex be a fueler instead of a drainer? And for me, the peak orgasm that we were talking about, where energy shoves out of the body, yeah, let's say that, when it leaves the body, that's the draining experience for me. And yeah, it might make you feel nice and floaty and good for a while, but ultimately what it does in the brain is it creates a bit of a crash afterwards, and we get a withdrawal symptom. It takes 2 weeks chemically in our brain for us to come back to homeostasis. It takes 2 weeks to recover from an orgasm, basically, for our brain chemistry. These are the experiments that they've done in, I believe, mice or rats. But with full body orgasm, because we're not peaking and it's not leaving us, I just feel zing all the time, you know?
I want to ask about if you feel that movement or that rippling also helps to clear the toxicity or the, if the movement also helps the purification or the purge as well as the pleasure and the life force energy. Because I've had some experiences, as you know, because the last one happened in your workshop, where the field of Tantra has sent me straight into my like trauma state. And we spoke about this on a recent podcast, me and Fiona, about like the fact that I was in your workshop in the corner crying for like 4 hours, but I could feel the energy in the room that, a lot of people were in their own space doing their own pleasure, and I could feel it moving the trauma out of my nervous system and out of my cellular system. And I just wonder if you experience that as well with the cancer.
There's a few things I can say here. So first of all, orgasm ultimately is release. That's what it is. Whether it's an internal release, whether it's an external release, then sometimes that can look like tears and laughter or rage or all sorts. And I also think when we access our pleasure, our greatest pleasure, what we're doing is we're getting our body into a place where it can feel the most it can possibly feel. And because sensation and emotion are so linked, what quite often occurs is people can shut down emotionally, which also shuts them down physically, and vice versa. So when we suddenly open ourselves up to feel more pleasure experience in the body, we also feel the other stuff, the stuff that we've been pushing down because it's not socially acceptable to feel. The time when we didn't cry when we were at the office, or didn't scream at someone when we were in the car, or weren't allowed to kick and swear at our partner. That's kind of, weren't allowed to be in our most joy, actually, when we suddenly realize, actually, I'm not allowed to be this joyous because, someone else is going to be having a really tough time, or someone's going to be jealous, or we've grown up in a family where it's not okay to show off or be that big. So when we open our body to feeling, we feel not only more pleasure potentially, but also more of the tricky stuff, also potentially more of the pain and the emotion stuff. So that's one thing I'd talk about in that kind of instance. But also what I teach on my full body orgasm retreat around using breath and sound and movement to allow the body into that space where pleasure can shift through us is my body can go into a shake or a wave or a move where my spine is flexing, my pelvis is moving. And sometimes it looks like a really big experience, and other times it can look like a tiny little quiver. And I know that this is also what happens in like a trauma release setting, for example. Wow. So when ducks or dogs needs to like shake off the argument they just had with another duck or dog, they shake it off, they shake. Their body goes into just these convulsions, and then they clear up and they go on with their day. So they don't hang around with the drama of the argument with this duck or dog that they've just had. They shake it off and they carry on. And so for me, it's very much that tool, that the way the body moves is a way of moving stuff through us so that it can be fully felt and expressed and moved through, so we don't cling on to it. And so that, TRE, trauma release exercises, or tension release exercises, they're kind of teaching us to go into the shake without the sensation, which is fine. It's a really great practice, actually, for those of us that are, have got anxious nervous systems, or we're at kind of like saturation point with our nervous systems. TRE is a really safe way of doing it. It puts the body into positions so that the body could just go into a bit of an auto shake and shake out the stress. And the head doesn't know what it's shaking out. The head will get very involved, wanting to know, but the body just goes into an auto response. And in my work, it's kind of similar in the sense of the body will go into that auto response, but with pleasure, and the shake will be the vehicle to move the pleasure through the system. The head will still get involved going, what's this? Am I doing this? Is this pleasure? When am I going to orgasm? Is this orgasm? I don't think I do. I like this? I don't know. Because it's not the framework that we've been taught is pleasure and sex and intimacy. So a lot of people question it when it first happens. And I'm like, do you know what? Surrender into it. If it feels good, give it permission, breathe a bit deeper, allow it, and see what comes out of you in that moment.
It's great just to release and shake things off, just shake it out.
And it feels good afterwards. If we give ourselves a really intense shake, and then stop, it's like, whoa, I feel alive right now. I feel the zing. I feel the leftover echoes in my body of that shake. Feels good.
And also, in a way, the full feeling of it. It's like, even if your brain has labeled it as an upsetting experience, like two dogs fighting, or, like, to fully feel it as we're speaking, I'm like, that becomes a pleasurable experience. Like, in a way, like, what's coming through for me is like, pleasure is full feeling of whatever it is. It's like, pleasure is letting your feelings fully flow through you, even if it is like rage, or like, it's like just the permission to feel fully.
And then letting it kind of complete its cycle and seeing what's the other side of that is generally peace. I speak to a lot of people who say, if I start crying, and this was definitely my experience, if I start crying, then I'm never going to stop. And it's like, you will stop at some point. You'll stop, and then there might be some peace or some clearness, and that's a good old purge out. Because if we don't feel it, we stuff it down, and it gets in the way of feeling pleasure.
Yeah. And actually, when you're speaking that, like, post-cry feeling is so beautiful, there's such a, like, feeling of not just peace, but cleansed, the body has, it's that post-rain feeling inside the body, isn't it? It's what happened to me after I cried in your workshop for hours. By the end, I was like lying there being like, I have so much peace and bliss now.
I've absolutely been there. I remember my first women's workshop, my first 2 women's weekends. I think I stepped through the door and started crying, and I didn't know why. I hadn't even said my name at that point. Just started crying and didn't stop for 48 hours till I was driving home, and then I turned up to the next one, and the exact same thing happened. But it's exactly what I needed. It was a safe space to be vulnerable, and I let out everything that I'd been holding in. And then after that, then pleasure could start.
Apparently my higher self likes to take me to Tantra spaces and do that at least once a year. But I feel like there's something to do with the field of and maybe this is another conversation, but Tantra is a complicated field. But like, a really held tantric space, I feel, has the power to create that shake in your own sexual energy or your own system, and bring up the really deep stuff that has been unheld. And it can almost only come up in that space. And I kind of feel like sometimes in the community there's a little bit of a pressure for you to go and have a pleasurable experience, when actually I think that you're just meant to go and have the experience.
Yeah. So one of the translations of the word tantra is weave, or the loom in which you would weave on. And I think one of the ideas around this is that we're bringing everything in. We bring everything into the space. So it's not just I turn up shiny and fluffy and sexy. So actually it might be the place where we, so many people contact me and go, I'm not feeling it today. I'm not going to come, or I'm not very well, or I'm on my period. And I'm like, come anyway. It's perfect. Come exactly as you are. You're perfect. This isn't Instagram. Come, be messy, be raw, be ragged, move through it. It's all right. and that there's space for everything. And I think when our body and our nervous system turns up at a space where there genuinely is a welcoming of whatever the hell our human experience is having in that moment, then the body just goes, I'm safe. And we get what we need from that experience. And for some people, that might be touch and intimacy and connection and sexuality and pleasure. For other people, it might be all of the learnings that feel a bit challenging, a bit edgy. And for some of us, it might just be absolute crumbling meltdown, with the hope that on the other side of that, there is some of that peace. And yeah, I like to hold spaces up, well, hopefully pressure free, because I don't want to make pleasure the goal. My work is about pleasure not being the goal. So even though pleasure is welcome and sexuality is absolutely welcome, we're not trying to chase it. We're just hoping that if we get our body into a safe enough space, pleasure will naturally find its way through, which actually our bodies want to be in pleasure. So if we remove enough blocks, pleasure is there under the surface all the time. Even if we live in pain and stress and discomfort, there's pleasure under the system. We're just not tuned into it. So in those spaces, my work is to help people feel safe, get back to their parasympathetic nervous system space so that pleasure can naturally occur, or the other stuff that needs to be felt, or the blocks that are in the way to accessing that.
And I think that, for the traumatized story self, to be able to not have that pressure is so important.
Yeah.
There's so much healing in actually, I'm going to be in this pleasure space and not be under pressure to be anything other than this vulnerable state that is going, actually, I can't participate, because there's so much pressure.
And it's also, and it's really good for the rest of the room as well, actually, if there is someone having a different experience. Because if, I might be in my nest in a pleasure state with someone, but yet if I'm easily distracted by something else going on in the room, whether that's someone else's pleasure noises, someone else is crying, or someone else is screaming, someone else, then I'm not in my full experience myself. One of my Tantra teachers would say, your inner experience needs to be greater than your outer experience. Because then you're not going to your core isn't going to get shifted. You're not going to get pulled in either direction. You're going to be able to stay with yourself. And it's just the reminder that, okay, I can be in pleasure while someone else over there is having a different experience. And that's okay. that doesn't mean that I'm a bad person, they're a bad person, that it shouldn't happen. Let's try and welcome it all in this moment. So there's something really beautiful about community and the level of acceptance that can happen definitely in the communities that I'm trying to create anyway. That's really valuable to me. And I've been to a lot of spaces where that doesn't happen so much. And there is a lot more focus on pleasure, goal, Whereas I'm like, okay, let's bring it all. That's far more interesting for me. Pleasure being involved in all of it than just the limited approach to just pleasure. It feels like
the collective weaving then of that Tantra loom, everybody's different threads is then creating the tapestry of that one space and honoring that kind of root of Tantra, which I love.
Absolutely. So how do we take Tantra out of the hands of the meditators in the caves and integrate it into real life? Because in real life, there is going to be someone crying in the corner. There are going to be the challenges. There are going to be the bills coming through the door. There are going to be the breakfast and the washing up that needs to be done. Let's not pretend, let's not keep pleasure to just on the Sunday afternoons. Let's try and find it in the nooks and crannies of our challenging life.
Well, that to me is perfect advice for everybody and our community to kind of tap into. And it's been a pleasure to have you share that with us, Jem. It really has. And I've had a few technical issues my side, so apologies I haven't been able to dive in as much as I'd like to in the conversation. But I'm coming back to Brighton soon, so I hope to be able to connect with you in person. But thank you so much for sharing your story as well. And I hope that people can take a lot from your illness story and how you overcame that, and we'll share all of your details so that people can understand more about your work and how to bring more joy into ourselves and our bodies and our minds. So thank you so much for all that beautiful wisdom that you shared with us today.
Mwah. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Ask you, well, two more things. Firstly, I really know we have a Life Force Cafe, which is where people go deeper, and I know that Fiona is going to want to, like, when her tech is apparently Fiona's tech and Tantra, something goes wrong.
Come to my temple. We'll work on your voice. Come to my temple.
Yeah, I know that Fiona would love to go deeper with you. I know I want to go deeper with you. I know everyone listening wants to go deeper with you. So we hope that you'll accept our invite to the Life Force Cafe.
I'd love that.
And also, who should we speak to next?
Whom you're asking me?
Yeah, who should we invite on the show next?
Oh, that's a really good question. Do you know what? I would talk to someone called Catherine Hale if she'll chat to you, because she originally worked in sexuality, but she's now very much about trauma awareness. And she also talks a lot about money, and specifically women's relationship to money. And for me, there's such a link around life force, trauma, money, sexuality. And so I think she would be the perfect person to get on, because money is still energy, and energy is life force. And if we don't have money, how can we live in our fullest? If we haven't got our basic survival needs covered. So chat to Catherine Hale if you can.
Amazing. Will you introduce us?
Yes, for sure. Absolutely would.
Thank you so much. It's been so life-giving having you on this show, so inspiring. Thank you for your amazing path and your amazing work, and you are literally living it. I wish the listeners could have seen how many times you've done little life force dances.
Had little joygasms on screen.
Yeah. Little grazings of pleasure throughout this show. It's amazing.
So today is my day off, and all I'm doing is this podcast, the gym, the float spa, and then having some vegan Japanese food. So that is living for me today. Yeah.
Perfect. Good for you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
May the life force be with you all.
Oh, Karila, what a special person Jem is. She's a gem.
She is a gem. I loved how many times she did little life force dances of joy. Like, she is living pleasure. It's just so beautiful to witness.
Yeah, she
like to heal your own cancer with pleasure and with full body orgasms is like a mind-blowing thing that she did, amongst all the many amazing other things she did.
I'm gonna put out a wild statement there that a lot of people will be skeptical on that and go, oh, come on, you crazies. What do you mean? You cured your cancer just by focusing on the joys in life? Can't possibly. I mean, but she did say she also took medication, but that when it's for palliative care and then you actually remove the cancer from your body, I mean, show me a sign or sign that there's something in all this crazy life force, Karila. It sounds like that joy was the answer.
I mean, she said life force to her is the opposite of cancer. Like she was like, it's the opposite of the reality of cancer and surviving. And like that for me was just like,
boom,
such a powerful statement for somebody that got cancer out of their system in 6 months when all they were given was palliative care. And and like that was one bit she said, and then she said all of this other amazing stuff about burlesque, about tantra space, about pleasure, about men and women and sex, and and I just want to be in her company, to be honest with you. Like she
joyful.
just feels, yeah.
And I do think as well when I talk about life force and what it means to me, and sometimes it's a vibe. I loved how she talked about the different water experiment. I've done that. I'm right back at my very early days of my kind of meditation and mindfulness and being curious. I had 3 jars of rice in water. One I wrote love on and spoke of kindness. The other I wrote hate and yelled at every day. And one I just left in the corner and ignored it. And the difference between the 3 is incredible. And it really, really made me think about our internal thoughts and how when we say mean things to ourselves, what we're doing to our bodies and our cells and our minds and by being negative and by saying horrible things. So by just showing a bit of love and kindness every day, this water smelled beautiful. Like she said, it looks amazing under molecules. And the hate-filled one, it smelled. It was disgusting. Yet they were sitting next to each other in jars. I encourage anyone who thinks we're crazy to give it a go.
And how is the one that you just abandoned?
Oh, it wasn't good either. It was unhappy. Wow. It wasn't as disgusting as the hate-filled one, but it went moldy. It went moldy. It had no love. It just kind of looked like it had died and had no energy to it. The hate one had energy. It was aggressively yucky. So being ignored and not giving ourselves that love, that joy, those permissions that you talked about is also not good for us.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's very interesting what we do to ourselves, isn't it?
and I love what she said, that like kind of pleasure begins with the foundation of self-care. It's like if you don't have that met, if you're not well slept, if you're eating toxic food, then like how can you live in pleasure? It feels like such important wisdom to understand in terms of the foundation of pleasure,
Definitely. Oh. Well, I imagine we're giving everybody a lot to think about after this episode. So big thanks to Jem again for coming to join us, and we'll share all her details so you can check out her amazing story and great work in more detail yourself. But until the next time, Karila, may the life force be with you with joy.
We hope this conversation has topped up your life force energy. If it has, then please help us spread the life force. Like, share, subscribe, all of that. And may the life force be with all of us.